Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko taranaki te amanga, ko pātea te awa, ko dento ko whānau ingoa, ko taranaki wā kāinga, ko Erin Maloney aho. Ko kai whakahari mātua o Tiny Nation, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to the Mike Bedford interview tonight. We're really excited to have as many of you here as possible, and we look forward to sharing a little bit more with you over the next 45 minutes. Just to give you a little bit of background, my name is Erin Maloney. I'm the founding director of Tiny Nation. Tiny Nation is a new home early learning organisation. And we are about collaboration. We are about bringing the sector together, and we are about trying to inject as much as we can into the knowledge base of our kaiko and our teachers and our educators out there, so that they can truly influence positive outcomes for our tamariki and our families and our communities. So tonight we're really excited to have Mike Bedford on board. I'm just going to bring him into the stream now, so just bear with me. Kia ora, Mike. How are you?
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity. When I looked through the list of questions you popped to me, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that's quite a lot. And then you've got more. So I really hope that I'll be able to do justice to those questions. We'll just see how we go.
Look, I'm sure you will, and there's been a huge amount of interest in this Facebook stream tonight, so I'm sure we've got a lot of people watching. We've got a lot of teachers, educators, parents, and just everyone generally interested in what you have to say around public health and the early childhood education sector. So just to give everyone a bit of background, I'll just do a quick intro to Mike and then we'll crack straight into it. Mike's a specialist in early childhood education design and wellbeing. He's really passionate about education reform. And Mike and I actually met almost 2 years ago now to discuss some research he'd done around a 2 to 8 model, 2 teachers to 8 children in homes, which got me really fascinated by some of the research he'd done just in public health generally, looking at space, looking at noise, looking at the way we are with children in early childhood services. And he's really passionate, I guess, about taking this work into the future and creating a new world of early childhood education and care in New Zealand. As a part of Mike's research, he's visited more than 700 early childhood education centres, conducting more than 1,500 visits. So pretty well placed to have a bit of a view, wouldn't you say, Mike?
I think I have an overview there, yeah. Yeah, and a fair bit of variety in there as well. In fact, I think it was a good way to get that whole scope of this incredibly diverse sector.
Absolutely. So when we talk about someone's why and their passion behind the work that they're doing, I know your journey through the early childhood education system from a public health point of view has spanned more than 20 years. Do you just want to give us a quick insight into your why and why early childhood education and how you ended up doing what you're doing?
Yeah, well, it sort of came as a little bit of a surprise in a way. It was just something I stumbled into to begin with. And that was because I had the role of doing outbreak investigation for the Wellington region in the early 90s. And what I found was that the early childhood centres were pretty seriously overrepresented amongst places having outbreaks. But when I worked with the centres, I discovered a whole lot more. I discovered a combination of good and bad. I discovered that the advice that was going to early childhood centres from public health really was not fitted to the environments, fitted to the people who were receiving that information, in the sense that a lot of it was very regulatory and directive. But what I found when I worked with early childhood teachers is that this was a passionate group of people who was just desperate for good information. So then I realised, well, we had to try and figure out the good information. We didn't actually have it in a lot of ways. So that was a journey for me of learning, discovering a gap. I really saw this gap. And then the more I got involved, the more I realised that I was fascinated by the whole area of early child education anyway, because I'm just really interested in human development. So this was a very good mix for me, because one of the things I very much enjoy is the connection between scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, design, engineering, and people. And in actual fact, I think, you know, if I had a rethink earlier on in my life, I might have gone for architecture that blends science and art and people. So I've got some of that thinking that sits in there. But I put it into the early childhood sector instead, and I thought, wow, this is just amazing, really interesting.
Awesome. I'm seeing lots of new people coming in and popping up into the stream and just joining us now. So to those of you who are just joining us, we're launching straight into it. But what we're going to do is reserve a bit of time at the end of this live stream for some questions. We've actually had quite a few coming through over the past couple of days, Mike, and a lot of them have been really focused, obviously, on this new journey we find ourselves on with COVID-19, reopening of early childhood education services, particularly those reopening under level 3 alert, but also a lot of teachers, I guess, wanting to know what some key considerations for them are under also alert level 2 as they look to reopen. And as we've seen over the past week, if you're in the early childhood sector and you're a provider or a teacher or an educator, a lot of information coming through from the Ministry of Education in terms of restrictions, things to be aware of, key considerations. What would your advice be to a teacher or an educator working at the moment under level 3 restrictions and working in services with children, bearing in mind the guidance that's coming through from ministry?
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the tricky things with this is that there is so much information that has come through from the Ministry of Education in terms of things to do and not to do and so on, that it would take up all of the sessions to sort of go through all those details. So I'm not going to attempt that. What I want to say first of all is that it really does look as if level 4 has achieved what it was designed to do. So I'm absolutely supportive of the government in the way that they have stepped carefully. And so level 3 is the kind of like, yeah, let's just step out the door a little bit and see how we are here. Great. I'm so impressed with the way that's been handled. What wasn't handled well was the initial communication around early childhood centres in level 3. And that was a frustration for me, because what we have now in terms of that very limited access of saying only for the children who really need it, or parents who need it for their children, actually there's also the children who really need it because things may have got a little bit hard at home. So, but keeping those numbers right down is what I had communicated to the Secretary on the 6th of April. So that's before we got to the level 3 announcement. So that's why I was very unhappy about the way it was announced, and of course many early childhood teachers were, because it didn't have the constraints that we needed at that point. It was looking like it was kind of wide open, and I was thinking, no way, this is just not going to work. So what we've actually had happen, the key intervention of keeping those numbers low, that's what seems to have happened. I hope this is true for all of the people who are watching now. I know it's going to be different for different centres. So what's happened is something that really brings the risk down, and we're also getting now much better information that says that against the normal trend for coronavirus, COVID-19 seems extremely unlikely to transfer from children to adults. That's very comforting. But the thing is, we had to wait for that really good information to come through. So I was looking at mixed information. I'm thinking, we're taking a risk here, and we've got to be real careful with this one. Let's not just say, you know, open them up. So that's that background. So what I want to do is give people a reassurance that I think we're actually in a really good position now. The chances of a child coming to your centre with a COVID-19 infection are extremely low. The chances of them transferring it to an adult is also extremely low, because I was so concerned for teachers. Teachers have a forgotten group in all of this. So having said that, first of all, our risk is now very low. Secondly, your best management is small group size. When you step beyond the management of small group size into all those details I'd have to say you're getting into very muddled risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the ministry advice I would back, some of it I would say you didn't know the context.
So what would you say, Mike, in terms of where we're going to go next with level 2? I know that the ministry have brought in some pretty strict criteria around, obviously, group size, like you've been talking about, and keeping those bubbles really small and tight. We've had a few questions from a couple of teachers who are kind of worried about the interlinking bubbles in terms of a child that comes to the early childhood centre from a family who also has children attending schools, and so I guess the linkage of bubbles right through. But also, obviously, how sustainable are some of these measures that the ministry are asking for from an early childhood education point of view, particularly in centres, the increased temperature, increased space, smaller group sizes? What do you think we'll see as we move to level 2?
Well, I think it's two quite separate things here. One is that there are limits to the practicalities of things, and this is what has sort of troubled me a little bit for teachers trying to handle all this. Oops, I seem to have gone fuzzy there. Yep, I feel unfuzzy now. It's good. I sharpened, but yeah, one of the things is just the difficulty in managing all these things. And so I was aware that if you had a very small group, that you could do that really high level of hygiene. But as soon as you go back to opening centres up to something more like normal operation, this is not going to be practical anymore. So the understanding of level 3 is that this is like the toe in the water. We're going in carefully. Level 2 is more of a potential alert level. Let's just try and be careful here. Let's keep our hygiene levels up. But you cannot do the level 3 stuff. It isn't sustainable if you open centres normally. So what you've got to rely on in level 2 is the government's assessment of the overall risk in the nation. That we're not going to go to level 2 unless they've got a pretty high level of confidence that this thing is pretty much gone. So what's likely to happen in level 2 is there's going to, and by the way, I haven't got this from the ministry. We have a little bit of a breakdown of communication there. But my expectation, level 2, is that we sort of go back to life mostly as normal, but trying to be more careful about our hygiene, and that there will probably be a continuation of testing and monitoring, and then hopefully we can say, okay, we're out of this thing and we've really got to rebuild our economy. So that's one half of that answer. Now, the other half is when you look at things like, well, the temperature recommendation. Now, that actually, whether they took it from WHO or took it from my research, I don't know, but my PhD research demonstrated quite clearly that you get a reduction in illnesses when you increase your indoor temperature. And the whole reason for this is that whereas bacteria, because they grow in the environment, like nice warm temperatures because they grow faster, for a virus, warmer temperatures, viruses don't grow in the environment. They can't. They're pretty much, they're not really a live thing. The virus is like DNA dust in a capsule. So it's not really living. But the warmer it is, the faster it degrades. That's the key to it. So viruses don't like warm. And that difference that I was finding through the upper teen temperatures, that kind of, it was between about 15.5 and 20.5 degrees range, you could see that the warmer it got, the more infections went down. So that's great. What the research also showed was that of my lovely cohort of 22 centres, the people who said, yeah, I can stick my temperature monitors in their centres, 90% failed to manage to get to 16 degrees all the time in winter. Half of them were aiming for 18 degrees. Now, the reason is that they've got the wrong heating systems. Heat pumps are not the best system for an early childhood centre. And I could give more time on this if we had more time to unpack the reason for that. But very quickly, there are two main reasons why heat pumps are not good. One is that they're trying to force warm air down from up high, and the natural buoyancy of warm air means that warm air wants to go straight back up again. So if you're trying to warm down at child level, the heat pumps are absolutely struggling simply to push the heat down. But the other thing is that when you warm the air first and you have open doors, that warm air just goes outside. If you use systems like infrared, what infrared will do is it heats bodies and floors directly, straight down, ceiling to floor, warm floor. Furniture, tables, everything soaks up the heat. And so that gives you thermal mass in the building. You open the door, you'll lose a bit of warmth from your air, but most of the heat stays locked in the building, just radiating out.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a much more efficient heating system with infrared, and it can cope with that. That's why these are the systems that you have they're used in classrooms now, they're used in public buildings, places where you have a big airspace, maybe lots of people coming in and out. It's not economic to try and hit that huge air volume directly. So that's something that really what my research showed is the Ministry of Education needs to start helping with this instead of just saying you have to. Doesn't work to go that way.
More funding maybe, Mike.
Well, funding for research and help. So this is the Ministry of Education has got to get involved in helping. Just saying you've got to get the technology helped into centres. We could do deals with the people who manufacture the stuff. We could run trials with it if the Ministry of Education helps. So that's a culture change we've got to get in the Ministry of Education.
I think that's a fascinating point, considering, I guess, all of the other research that you've done in the space around public health and early childhood education, and the fact that we're pretty limited just generally in early childhood education to find evidence-based research in New Zealand without having to draw on international research and standards as well. So with all of that in mind and conscious of the time, do you want to just give us a little bit of an overview? Let's rewind almost 2 years ago when we met in Wellington in a cafe and you sat down to take me through your 2-teacher to 8 children model, a proposal that you were putting through as a part of the home-based care review, but also the wider early learning strategic plan consultation process. And just give the listeners a little bit of an overview of what that involves and why you've put it forward as a proposal.
Yeah, okay. What I'll do, I'll just mention one of the things that would have been good to touch on, but I'm going to connect it into the discussion as we go on, is the space per child.
Yes.
The two things most critical, and I'm jumping ahead to one of your questions further on, what are 2 things I would say the most critical that we've got to improve? It is ratios and it is space per child. They are the biggest things. And the other thing that we've got to get onto is group size. And I would have to say that anyone who says group size doesn't matter just doesn't understand early childhood education and doesn't understand relationships, because group size is about relationships. Ratios are about relationships as well. And looking at that aspect of relationships, this is where it really connects into the 2 to 8 model. So the 2 to 8 model concept is really simple, and it's done all over the world. We have this unusual situation in New Zealand where our home-based environment is restricted to 1 teacher, 4 children. That's the only model we have. Most countries have a range of up to 12 children. Now, I'm not going to advocate that. I think that's pushing it. But to have 2 teachers and 8 children, that's perfectly normal internationally. Now, I was thinking about this just actually looking at my own house. So this house behind me here, this is an average 1960 house. It's 125 square meters, which is smaller than the average New Zealand house now. So I think the average is about 150 square meters roughly now. But I have here 40 square meters of available living space. So if you were doing home-based, that's what you'd have in my house. So 40 square meters divided by 8 children, that gives you 5 square meters per child. Deduct 10% for fixtures and fittings, and you're left with 4.5 square meters per child against the minimum in the regulations of 2.5. The ministry would license this space if this was childcare. Sorry, yes, if it was childcare.
As a centre, yeah.
Clarified term here, okay. I'll use the term childcare because one of the major drivers behind children attending an ECE centre is childcare first, then early child education. And the whole purpose of the 1990 regulations in bringing childcare under the Ministry of Education was to ensure that every child in childcare had early child education in childcare. So we've got to stop being afraid of the term childcare. It doesn't take away from early child education.
Absolutely. And that kind of encapsulates the question I had for you around care and how that word is missing from our vocabulary sometimes when it comes to talking about early learning and early childhood education.
Yeah, so we'll pick up on that one in a minute too. We'll try not to forget that. But okay, so this area would be licensed if it was centre-based for 14 children, not 8.
Yeah.
So there's your crowding comparison. So I'm looking at it and thinking this has actually got great potential. And not only that, but I just happen to have half a quarter acre section out there, which the ministry would license for 100 children. In fact, actually it's slightly more, so they license it for 110.
Wow.
Yeah. But half a quarter acre section, that's 100 children. We can give to 8. Here. And in the middle of my back fence, there is a gate that leads onto a vast park area with a river running around it and wide open that connects across the entire length of this little piece of a valley that's got a street about 150 houses long and another one off of it about 100, and that's it in this valley. But all of this is connected.
Yeah.
So what it means is that in your home environment with your 2 teachers, now, first of all, with 2 teachers, that means that you can be support to one another, and it means that you can have adult conversation during the day. So how did your weekend go? And how's blah, 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 because you know your rallies and who's interested in what, and you know, how's your house renovation going on, and all that stuff. Chat, 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 because that's what children need to hear. They need.
Yeah, and I think one of the big problems for teachers now too, and teaching in home-based settings and obviously working from home, is that isolation factor. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that I've been feeling it over the last 5 weeks as we've been in lockdown, just that kind of craving to be with other adults and in a professional context. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I found it really just for anybody actually. Because unfortunately for me, I happen to live here in my own bubble. Yeah, it's that contact makes a difference. But yeah, the thing for that relationship is that, and this is something that Rick Forey talked with me about last week when I did the session with him, that we're boxing up children into their own age groups. So 4-year-olds are with 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds are with 3-year-olds. And where are they getting their vocabulary from? Especially if you have a stressed environment where teachers are struggling to cope with the group size, with the ratios, with the spaces and the noise. You can take that out of the picture and now you've got something more like normal life. But of course, you've also got to kanatana. So when I was thinking about, so one of the objections I got from people on the 2 to 8 model was that it was breaking with the kind of ethos of the family home environment. Well, if you live in a society where, 4 is a giant family or something, 4 children, but there are many, many places in the world where 8 children will be a family. A family of 10 is not that unusual. But in New Zealand, yes, it is a big family, but it's still family. It's still manageable. So that's the key thing, is does it feel like home? Does it feel like family? And that you've got the ability for older children and younger children to interact. But wait, there's more. And the more has already been done, actually. So I'm aware that in home-based, it's really common to operate in hubs so that you'll have groups of homes.
Yes.
Yeah,
pods of homes that come together and educators that come together with like-minded philosophies, and yeah, absolutely.
So what that means is that, say in the street that I live in with the park over the back, we could say, it's going to be a lovely day on Wednesday. What say we all pile over to the park and all the 4-year-olds can blast around together now. And they're going to get to know other children in their community, so they're connected across. This is not new to home-based. It's just doing it in a 2 to 8 model. But now there's an extra thing, and I thought about this after I've talked with you, so this will probably be a little surprise and see what you think of it. I did some numbers here, and I thought, okay, So there's one thing that home-based struggles to be able to do, and that's to provide the specialist equipment and environments that you could get, say, in a kindergarten or play centre setting. It's just not practical to have every home having a full set of upper body climbing equipment, climbing walls and big sandpits, stuff like that. So if you had, say, 3 hubs in the 2 to 8 model, we were now looking at something in the region of maybe 140 children across those 3 hubs. You could have a kindergarten environment available, so basically a kindergarten that is part of the system that gives children, say, 2 half days a week. This is how the numbers will run out. And with those kinds of numbers, you might be looking, so this is like looking at a 30-child session, a 2-teacher, 30-child session, kindergarten sessional, just as we used to do. We used to have 2-teacher kindergartens, but because it's a short time, you can manage, okay? And so it means that you could run 8 sessions a week, so that just as it used to be, you have 2 half days for non-contact time in the kindergarten. But while you've got some of your children, depending on your age group range, wouldn't be the babies, but suddenly you'll unload some of your children to the kindergarten, which means you get non-contact time at home-based.
Wouldn't that be amazing for educators?
Precisely.
And I think it does draw on a lot of what families do already with those dual enrolments, where they are seeking the best of both worlds, where they have the home educator, but then children also have the opportunity 1 or 2 days a week to engage in, in kindergarten sessional care situations as well.
So to me, this is where we get the best of both worlds. I don't see any reason why we can't wrap up the best of early child education with everything from the home environment to the tour entertainer to, mixing with one age group, kindergarten, package the whole lot up if we think about it. So this is an exciting potential. The other thing I love about that kind of home-based model is that it brings children back into communities.
Absolutely.
Because it's not I do have trouble with commuter-based ECE, where you drop your child off on the commuter route, because they're totally disconnected from their communities. Another couple of things with the 2 to 8 model, and this is true of home, actually, the 2 to 8 model really enables this. That if my proposal on this was that we have at least 1 teacher trained and the other 1 in training. So you have 2 trained teachers or 1 + 1 in training. Now, that means that you can start with a trained teacher and then you bring another person who might have some incredibly valuable skill. It could be a Somali community and you've got a Somali person coming, knows the culture, knows the language, brings all that richness straight into the environment, and that person starts training. It could be a person who really has skills with autism, or it could be someone who has skills with another particular developmental need, and you bring that person into that environment and they bring their knowledge to add to early child education knowledge in an environment where you can now swap your knowledge and you can talk together through the day because you get a group size of 8. So all of that richness comes into it. So it's got the potential to really tailor homes to a community that you might have maybe in a hub of 6. You might have 3 homes that are kind of pretty general, but you might have another 3 homes that have met a particular need, or they might have a particular other cultural, spiritual focus, whatever you want, but you can get that speciality in there in those little numbers. So to me, that's something that's very rich in that home-based model. And the other thing that you can do is start bringing in people from the community to help, particularly when you do excursions, because it just so happens that this means you can fit the children in a van. And so it's going to be easier to get people from the community to come in and help if they're only dealing with a house with 8 children and 2 teachers, not 100-child centre. Whoa, scary, But the house, people can cope with the idea. Yeah, I'd love to come along and help. Yeah, just for that day. Yeah. And so,
I think this model, Mike, you've done a lot of work on it, and you're one of the founding members of the Teachers Advisory Group. Is that right? advocacy group, sorry, on Facebook?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. No, Susan Bates is
Susan
the
Bates?
of that group. Now, the thing about Susan is, so the funny thing is when I get called, sort of like the national expert in kind of thing. Okay, as public health qualified expert in early childhood education, yes, I am the lead in that. But it just so happens that for public health qualified people who are doing that, I have brought all the other people in New Zealand with me in the room behind me. Here they all are. Okay, so this is why I'm the lead. It's because I happen to be the only one. It's not very distinguished, really. It's just the lead of one. But what Susan did is she came from early childhood teaching and researched health, and particularly health for teachers. So she's done a stunning job of that. And when we got talking to each other, it's like, oh, yes, we understand this stuff. We're talking the same language because we've got that connection, the intricate, detailed, amazing connection between wellbeing and early childhood education at the invisible level. It's so fine. So we understood that, same language. And so we did quite a lot of thinking around alternatives and ways that we could do stuff. So Susan certainly contributed to the development of the 2 to 8 model. But then I started doing research, and that's when I talked to you, because you were my research along with other people, because my research was simply to go to home-based people and say, okay, I dreamed up this idea talking to Susan Bates, and then I ran it past my cat, and she had no objections at all. And I'm just not really sure that's enough. So maybe I should talk to home-based people. And so that's where it came from. So the conversation went on with a number of people around the country. There were, I said, throw anything you can at it. Let's see, is this viable? Does it work? Looked into the economics. Now, the economics was based very much around saying, you've got to fund this stuff properly, government. So we're not looking at the way you funded the current model. You should not have the funding at any lesser level than any other part of the sector. So you need to be looking kindergarten level here. And I can't see any reason why this couldn't be absolutely the best of what we can do, as long as you fund it at an adequate level.
And a great complementary model initially too, to pilot alongside the current models and watch it grow and see how it develops. So if anyone's listening who's really keen on that 2 to 8 model, because it's really fascinating, it's well worth the read, you'll be able to find it on the Teachers Advisory Group Facebook page. On the left-hand side, there's a section, isn't there, Mike, with research, with your research, and so you can download it there, or just direct message us and we can share it as well.
Just trying to picture the left, right. So on the left-hand side with Facebook, you've got a thing that says Files.
Yes.
So you click on Files, and that will have all the files that have been loaded onto that site. So you can just go on there and you can download them. But at the moment, I think, because sometimes this changes, on the right-hand side, you'll see the 2 to 8 model just sitting there, ready to click on the right-hand side. So that's one way. The other thing is that, of course, you can, if you want to personal message me, if you find me on one of the Facebook pages you're on, I can just attach the file and ping it back to you. That's pretty easy as well.
Perfect. I mean, it would be great to see a groundswell around this in terms of the sector getting behind it, because it's got such merit to get out there.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think I'd like to have a lot of people knowing about it, and then we need to look at the best way to make a push to government on this.
Absolutely. And in terms of a new world post-COVID-19, and I know we're all thinking that because the narrative very much at the moment everywhere is that, we're very much in this rebuild phase, but rebuilding to what? We're not going back to where we came from. We are co-creating something that New Zealand and probably the world has never seen before in light of the wake of COVID. I mean, obviously, you've done a huge amount of work across the whole public health spectrum in early childhood education. You talk about space and ratios being the 2 biggest things you think there's an opportunity to do something about really, really quickly that would have a really immediate impact on high quality outcomes for children and
Yeah.
for teachers and wellbeing. Is there anything else that you think, if we're co-constructing this new world, obviously the 2 to 8 model has to be in there. Is there anything else you would throw in the mix there? I'm thinking along the lines of your wellbeing submission as well, in terms of some other ideas around how the sector could operate in a more collaborative, more quality-focused way.
Well, touching on the wellbeing based submission, so this was for the draft strategic plan, along with 5 other authors. I just collated together quite a big report. It's an 80-page, 10-topic report that's wellbeing themed for early childhood education, and so it picks up on a range from Te Whariki itself, through the physical environments, where we place centres. You know, we shouldn't be squishing something for children in between a busy road, a railway line, and a motorway. We should be looking for green space, for goodness sake. And that can be done working, for example, with schools. So I'll talk in a minute about the quality-based contracting model. But part of that model also envisages a new model for the Ministry of Education itself. So this is actually a new section of governance specifically for the early childhood sector. I mean, to me, to just lump it in with a blur with school and everything else is just not okay. It's so different. So part of the idea with the shift in Ministry of Education function is that they become proactive in finding sites. They talk with city councils and they find sites. They talk with schools and find sites. So that was part of it. What was the pointer to that from the submission is the fact that we've got some pretty rotten locations that have emissions and particulates problems. We also looked at infectious diseases. We looked at teacher injuries, teacher health. So again, in that same location on Teachers Advocacy Group Facebook page, or personal message me, I can just ping that through to you. But the very first, that had 63 recommendations in it. So this was not just pointing to the problems. Wow. This is saying, oh my goodness, have we got things we can do here? And one of them was like, increase the temperature to 18 degrees, but put in place a program to assist early childhood centres to get there.
Yeah.
That's in the report, you know. But recommendation number one was a cross-government agency to ensure that the well-being of children in early childhood education, and frankly, most of what you do for the well-being of children is also going to be the well-being of teachers, that organisation is tasked with being both the go-to body and the organisation that ensures that other government agencies understand how to work for the well-being of children, and also works with, for example, local authorities, so that you don't have resource consent requirements that work against the interests of children, that we might decide that maybe children are more important than cars, so we could give the space to them instead. So yeah, these are some of the things that are in there. Should we move into the quality-based contracting proposal?
Let's finish with the quality-based contracting proposal, and then what we might do, Mike, is there's been a few questions come up that I'm just conscious of along the sidebar from people who are particularly interested in some of the things you've already mentioned and might just like to know a little bit more. So let's finish with the quality contracting, and then we'll go to some questions. Yeah.
Oh, actually, I'm just going to say when we're talking about how to move forwards, this is important, because we've been stuck in a situation where it's really difficult to move on ratios or space per child because of jammed up spaces. How do you do this? You can't just say, well, we're just going to have more space per child because that means less children where you can put them. Well, we're moving into an environment where we're going to have reduced demand for child hours. Now, this is, of course, because of unemployment, and unemployment is not a nice thing. But reduced child hours means that it's not necessarily that children aren't attending, but you might have a lot more children doing sessional, because they're there actually just for the early child education component of for parents who are either unemployed or doing part-time reduced hours. We'll see how businesses manage this going forward. I'm hoping that we'll see a lot of businesses that can manage to do reduced hours for staff rather than just lay people off. But each business would have to know how practical that is. But what this means is that you have children attending for shorter times. Now, if we maintain the funding level for the sector at current capacity for child hours, that leaves room now to have better ratios and more hours per child. And we grab the chance. Now, the problem is that there has been pushback on these things because of an idea that if you improve the standards, it's going to cost businesses more money and they won't be viable. This has to go with funding.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. You can't.
I was waiting for you to get there, Mike. No.
Yeah. But if we hold current funding, it gives us room to move. So as long as we don't drop the funding down because we've got lower child hours, now we can say, well, we've got the capacity to do better in the system. So that's the thought. Now, quality-based contracting. The weird thing that we have in New Zealand is that there would be no other activity of government that is so heavily government funded that says, as long as you have a license, you can go and do it, and you don't have clear quality and performance requirements. Now, as soon as I say that, people might say, well, what about Education Review Office? But the Education Review Office is looking at a very narrow range of what counts for children. And I don't want to go too much into my analysis of that. You know, one of the issues I have with the Ministry of Education at the moment is their absolute lack of monitoring of the most critical things. So the ministry doesn't monitor ratios, doesn't monitor space per child, doesn't monitor anything environmental at all, doesn't monitor distribution of qualifications across rooms. And we've got the problems that come in with things like ratio sharing. So we've got problems embedded in the system for monitoring that need to be addressed. But the quality-based contracting system says, actually, if you're going to, well, first of all, it makes the Ministry of Education the provider for the nation of early care, care and education, with care being the bottom line. We're looking at the care and quality of life of children, and into this we incorporate education. That's a big problem, is that the Ministry of Education has never acknowledged they're responsible for care. They acknowledge that they're responsible for education, which is why we end up with a strategic plan for early learning. There's a whole lot more going on than learning.
Yeah, totally.
Okay? So, yeah, I mean, one of the ways I look at that is, learning is essential to life in the way that eating is essential for life. But we don't live to learn any more than we live to eat. Eating can be a pleasure, learning can be a pleasure. But let's get this in the context of life. So the ministry is responsible, and so they now provide that service by contracting the existing providers. And all that would happen in the transition is you delete license and you put in the contract with exactly the same parameters for that particular centre. So people don't think there's any big drama that we would have over everyone having to negotiate contracts with the ministry or anything silly like that. We can't do that. You just have a transition that says it's not a license anymore, it's a contract. Oh, but now the ministry has an obligation to contract where they have a choice between providers. They must contract with the best provider. So if you have oversupply, we're looking at the best quality provider, not the biggest, the newest, the flashiest, the one with the best advertising, but the best.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you about how we measure that. The other thing is they would have an obligation not to contract services that place children or teachers at unreasonable risk. They don't have to prove harm anymore. All they have to show is unreasonable risk. You don't have your children under 2 playing within 6 metres of up to 1,000 vehicle an hour traffic, braking and accelerating on a bend, as we do at the moment. It's not okay. So you don't contract that. It's actually the principles that you might use with a roading contractor. You know, if you had a roading contractor that didn't care about the safety requirements and didn't look after the staff, that could come back on the government. What are you doing contracting these people?
Mm.
So it says, government, you're going to have to contract good people. Now, the next thing, the quality measurement. Now, I've looked at different kinds of quality measurement concepts, and you've got things like, for example, structural and process quality. Some people may be familiar with this. If you Google structural and process quality without putting in early child education, you'll get factories, because that's what it is. This is industrial quality. I don't agree with it.
Mm.
So I'm proposing something else that starts from the platform of care. So it has 3 domains of quality. The first one is quality of care. And that's things like, do you have a primary caregiver system?
Yes.
That makes sure a child is not left without a person they know well. And that means you need 2 primary caregivers per child to cover for when one is on holiday or sick, but also if somebody leaves.
Mm.
It's not a grief process that a child has to go through, because this is serious damage when this happens.
Oh, absolutely. And that dyad, that relationship, everything we know about early brain development and the science behind it, emphasises the importance of primary caregiving and those attachment relationships.
So that is part of it. So that quality of relationship is the starter. Relationship with the community, relationship with families, be looking to that. The next thing is quality of environment. So can children run outside? To me, if you have an outdoor environment where it's too small for children to run, that's abuse for the living environment for maybe 50 hours a week. For a child's growing up years, that should not happen. So do you have green spaces, natural environments that children can access? Do you have quiet tuck away spaces, indoors and outdoors? Both. You've got to have those quiet activity spaces. So you're looking at that environmental quality. And then the third one, which builds on the first 2, now that you've got your child happy, healthy, now they're geared to just get out and do the stuff and take advantage of all you can give them in added value for learning and development. So that's your third one, added value for learning and development. Now, I've used that term development, and that's because you need to look at more than learning. So those added values could include a whole lot of stuff around language, obviously kohanga, the whole environment of, I don't know if kohanga still used te korowai, but te korowai, the cloak that was equivalent to the desirable objectives and practices of people around, that really brought in the whole of the whānau environment, the whole of that collective care. That's added value. But the other thing, which I think is just one of the most perfect examples of unconscious brain learning, would be proprioception. So for people who are not aware of this, just take your index finger and put it on your top vertebrae, right there. Did you find it?
Yep.
Okay, but you can't see it because you haven't got eyes in the back of your head, I'm guessing, unless you want to turn around to make sure we all know you haven't. But how does your body know how to do that? It's tracked your finger all the way through space, over to there, boop, perfect. It's proprioception. And you develop that by doing things like hanging upside down. Why do children hang upside down? It's not a normal thing for most adults to do, especially when they're sleeping. And so, this is part of why children do that stuff. Do they have the opportunity? Can they dig a hole in the ground? There's all of these things. So this is added value. And that's as diverse as could be. So one of the things about the quality assessment is it is not pedagogically prescriptive. It embraces diversity of kinds of early childhood education. And that's another thing that would be a requirement on the Ministry of Education in this model, is to encourage diversity of provision. So hopefully that looks like a very positive picture. Now, a couple more things. How are we going for time?
Well, we've probably got a couple more minutes before we need to start rounding it up.
Okay, well, a couple more things. I'm proposing, and this is pulling a number out of the air, let's try 50th percentile in quality, that you may not expand your service. It's buy a new one, buy a new centre, build a new one, increase your licence, unless all of your centres under that service are above the 50th percentile line. Now, what this is saying is that if you've got a centre that is below the 50th percentile line, your first job is go and fix it up before you go and build another one. And that's to deal with that low quality growth-based model that says we get away with the minimum that we can, and when we've got that one ticking along, never mind if the outdoor area is crappy and I need new equipment and whatever, we'll make more money if we build another one than if we fix this one up. No longer. So it's to stop that approach and say, no, if you want to grow, you've got to be good. I think it's totally fair, totally fair. Another one is a mechanism of assessment. So we haven't gone into the assessment, and the assessment will be done by a number of different ways, intelligent ways, including confidential teacher feedback. So this system acknowledges the teachers as the professionals, says you know what's going on, you are the people who need to be assessing what's going on. So that means that you might have a little form to fill out that says, are you out of ratio? Never. Occasionally. Sometimes, often, very often. Okay, and that doesn't mean that if you have a bunch of teachers who are going often, very often, that the ministry rushes in and says, you bad people. That means that you might get more spot checks.
Yeah.
Spot checks could be part of it. But also, you might look at the bottom 5% of centres for teacher turnover. This is not difficulty getting people, this is holding people, okay? And you would red flag that in the contract and say, please explain. You don't go on and beat people up. What you do is you say, please explain, tell us what is going on. And it will be mandatory for that centre to start addressing that problem and come up with a fix. But they might say, hey, look, actually, we just had a massive earthquake and all our teachers ran away. And you go, yeah, well, this is a community-wide problem. It's not your fault. That's okay. Intelligently. But what it sends a real clear message right the way through the sector that says, you better start looking after your teachers, people. Because if they leave too fast, what that means is your high staff turnover is damage to children. So regardless of the reason, we've got to attend to it. So that's the models.
And I guess a lot of indicators, just like any other business, around, you know, people, potential, health, retention, all of those things. And I guess feeding into that early learning strategic plan, of which we're still kind of waiting on some key timeframes and dates as to when action will happen. Some of the things you've mentioned would actually feed in beautifully with some of the recommendations in the early learning strategic plan, just taking them to the next level in terms of how we can actually monitor things in a way that really is going to represent high quality delivery.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And of course, one of the little hiccups in this is that we've got the Education and Training Bill going through. Now, the Education and Training Bill contains some clauses that help the ministry in terms of empowering the ministry to refuse a centre because of a poor track record and things like that. But there's no requirement, at least I haven't picked it up, tell me if I've got this wrong, but in the model I'm proposing, the ministry is responsible as if it were running the centres for the quality, because the ministry is contracting them, it's contractor, it's now responsible for what that contractor does. You can't say that teaching teachers really badly is just an employment issue. That is not okay. The ministry has to be responsible for care of the workforce. We haven't got that. We haven't got any system that gives an incentive for quality. That's what quality-based contracting does. It's a massive incentive for quality. And by the way, the people at the top of the system, the people who show really good quality, the ministry would be pretty much under obligation to say, come to us, people, we love you, we want to work with you, because they also have a requirement to maintain capacity. So if you start peeling off bad providers, you're going to have to provide some other ones. And you're looking to the good people.
And what a way, I guess, to model what best practice looks like too, by taking those providers that are genuinely meeting set standards and showcasing the work that they're doing to the rest of the sector, a really collaborative approach that everyone can learn from.
Yeah, totally. And I just glancing over, I just thought this is probably unfair because I'm jumping to the latest question, but a question about pay. Well, the thing is, if you pay your teachers really badly, they're more likely to leave. So what that means is that it's up to the organisation to decide whether they want to lose their teachers and lose their contract, or pay their teachers and keep their contract. So there's a mechanism for quality in here that is about all of quality. You look at something like bullying, whether it's an internal culture of bullying, because you teach teacher bullying as part of this. Let's not dump it all on centre managers.
Yeah.
But it's still the responsibility of the organisation to deal with that, not to tolerate internal bullying. So what that means is that if your teachers are leaving because of bullying, the management's got to come up with a way to fix it. It's their responsibility. But you don't have to send in time after time Ministry of Education people trying to fix this. The management have the responsibility. And so it's a big protective thing for teachers, and all those things you could never ever measure. You can't go and measure bullying, it's impossible.
Absolutely. It's those cultural indicators, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Mike, we could probably go on all night, and I feel like this was part one of maybe a wider Mike Bedford series, because your work really does need to get out there more. And I think the time is right for the plucking in terms of being able to push forward and really start to influence where we go to next, because no doubt the government's going to have to, in light of COVID-19 and our new normal, review everything, review the way we're looking at early learning and care and how it's all bedded in, and our minimum standards, and how they could be reciprocated post this level 3 into a new world. There were a few questions that came up that I noticed as we were talking about the 2 to 8 model from teachers who are obviously working in centre-based services, going, we love this idea, but how would it apply in a bigger centre-based model? And I think you went on to then kind of cover it around your points with regards to funding and lower child numbers, and being able to manage smaller numbers in that way, and smaller bubbles.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Now, the other thing I'm going to mention here, but it's too soon to really pop it out as model, is that there is a wider government thought going on here. That means that I think the person we're really going to have to be looking to is Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah.
That what we're looking at is not something that just concerns the Ministry of Education, because of that mistake of saying that the first 5 years is all about education and learning. It ain't. We need a wider discussion about children's quality of life across the board, and how non-parental care and education measures into wider quality of life. But I'm going to hold there on those thoughts, because I feel like I need to have a little bit more processing, tossing stuff around, maybe reading background documents.
We'll bring you back. Hey, thank you so much, Mike. I can see all the comments coming up and everyone just going, yes, you're speaking my language. This is so true. Perfect model. So it's really clear to see that you've got an entire workforce from a sector, and by workforce I mean people who are at the coalface dealing with the day-to-day realities of being in a profession that they really, really love, being in it for all the right reasons, but feeling really restricted by the environments that they're currently working in. So thank you all for tuning in. Together, I think we can really push some of this work out there more, and no better time than now. Mike, we hope to have you back again to join us again soon. And for everyone else who's out there, this is the first live Facebook stream of a series for Tiny Nation that we're calling Expanding Our Bubbles. And it's all about how we're reintegrating back into our new normal as early learning service providers, and all of the things that we need to be mindful of, and that we need to consider along the way. Obviously, Mike's led the way with the public health message, and that's huge. But more than that, the wellbeing message that is really so clearly interwoven into all of the work that he's done for both children and teachers, which is awesome to see. Next week, we have Judy Hunter, who's on the executive of the Infant Mental Health Association of New Zealand. She's done a huge amount of work on mindfulness for both children and for educators in Kaiko, and for parents, and how to engage in this in a really practical way, and on a day-to-day basis. She talks a lot about being good enough, about managing a lot of the a lot of the situations that we've actually talked about tonight when it comes to having different competing priorities and ratios and size, and particularly how to work with children and how to model what resilience looks like in the face of crisis, which there's probably no better time to be delving into that and doing a deep dive into that kind of work. So we hope you can join us again next Thursday, 7:30 p.m. For a chat with Judy. And every week on a Thursday night, through till we move into level 2, we'll be bringing along a guest speaker just to help the sector with some of those key considerations and inject a bit of free professional learning and development in there. So kia ora, Mike. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for taking us through all of that. Oh, yes, one more, go.
Just a plug. Please do get hold of the document that describes the quality-based contracting model. Okay, it sounds like it's about exciting as cold mashed potato, but now that you've heard what it's describing, if you go into that, it will answer a lot of people's questions. It's actually got a Q&A section at the back. There's a 2-page brief version that we can have a quick look, but the full version, which I think is 19 pages, is actually, I think you'll find it a really interesting read. Don't be put off by the fact that it's contracting, it's 19-page doc. It doesn't read like a contract, it reads like
it's a really good read. And for those of you who are wanting to see that, we did post it in our event page on this Facebook event. But what I'll do is I'll also include it in a special Facebook post and see if I too can build a little files tab on the Tiny Nation page where we can actually collate some resources from some of our key partners like Mike.
Yep, that's great. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. See you.